Let's crack on with our first session on creativity and culture. As we're all well aware, we're living through tumultuous, polarising times with enormous cultural, societal, political and environmental shifts underway, which are having a fundamental effect on how businesses and organisations are showing up in the world, and that was before the pandemic hit. So what's the role of creativity in this landscape? Can big creative ideas and creative campaigns really make a difference in breaking down borders, erasing taboos and reflecting diverse cultural nuances? And with so many Cannes Lion-winning campaigns over the past few years, focused on really serious and earnest topics and problems, when times feel heavy, is there still room for levity and even humour in creative execution? I'm joined in the studio today by guests from three of the most award-winning and legendary consumer shops in the UK. To my left is Paul Valentine, Creative Director of Tin Man. Next to Paul is Graham Goodkind, Founder and Chairman of Frank. And at the end, we've got Joe Carr, Co-Founder and Chief Client Officer of Hope and Glory. And joining down the line from Dubai on the screen, we have Myrna Escarus, Senior Art Director for the MENA region at Hill & Knowlton Strategy. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Myrna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dubai. Amazing. A true hybrid panel session to kick off the day. So, Paul, coming to you first, what is the role of creativity now when society and culture are going through such big shifts?
It's interesting. I think there's, as you say, so much change and so much of it being driven by technology. You know, our lives, particularly in the last year, have been lived through screens, and that's not going back. And we're more comfortable now living through screens than we've ever been before. And I think what's going to become really important is the role in creativity in making connections. That's essentially what it's there for, to create unseen connections between ideas, concepts, people, to deliver emotional connections. And actually, in a world where technology is growing, maybe doing our jobs, even on the creative side in 20 years, I think it's going to be the role of creativity to kind of keep us human and keep those connections, emotional, human, and connections to new ideas really alive.
Yeah, and keeping the human being at the heart of all the creative execution as we're all going through very weird times. Graham, what would you add to that?
For me at Frank, we bang on a lot about a word, talkability, which is a creative process and methodology for trying to come up with really good ideas. And at the heart of it, there are 10 cultural triggers which a creative needs to press, if you like, to press these triggers, one or more of them, to kickstart this word of mouth, this buzz, this sharing via social media for a great creative idea. And I think these triggers, even in these times and as society is going through huge shifts, these triggers are constant. And even though society changes, these triggers don't. And I think the role for creativity is to try and seek out these triggers for talkability. Otherwise, you kind of end up with an idea that the agency might like, the client might like, but they really don't get anywhere, and they become just ideas for ideas' sake.
Joe, what's your take on what creativity means now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because you're right. I think there's been so much change over the last, in last year definitely, but and it's kind of hard to keep up with all the different issues that are rightly being aired and need to be aired. But where does creativity sit within that? And I think I'm probably a little bit with you, Graham, in that you know, I don't think it changes that much. I think it's the job that we've always done, which is how do you raise awareness? How do you prick a conscience, or even sometimes prick kind of pomposity and the status quo? How do you challenge things and get a message across? It's storytelling. It's always been storytelling. I just think the message has become a lot more serious than perhaps it would have been 5 or 10 years ago. But I think the actual creativity piece is exactly the same as it always has been.
Interesting. Myrna, from the Middle East, what's your perspective on the role of creativity now?
Well, I agree with everything that everyone said. I feel like creativity actually plays a very major role in like two particular things: raising awareness and changing perceptions, especially in the region. As many has heard and seen on the news, there are so many critical political and cultural issues. If I take Egypt, for example, there are huge cultural shifts. You see on TV, you see on social media, there are lots of like women empowerment ads, a lot of sexual harassment education, unhealthy food consumption awareness campaigns. And as we go, you feel the impact of these campaigns on people. Like, in my opinion, creativity is super important in simplifying such a complex topic to the audience. And with that, you win. You as a brand, you win the people, you win the audiences, you reach your objective at the end of the day. So certainly, I do believe that creativity plays a major role, especially in our regions where complex topics are everywhere and surrounded us.
But do you think, Myrna, do you think big ideas and creative campaigns can really make a difference in the world from your experience?
I do believe so, to be honest, because if you think about the campaign that just won Grand Prix, the bread campaign for the cancer awareness, like it was a local campaign that achieved global brand awareness, and it's a taboo topic in the region, right? Not everyone, especially women in the region, like are very comfortable, checking their breast and being more aware of this whole breast cancer issue. But this campaign in particular, and it's well deserved, like it won the Grand Prix for a reason, because it made a shift. It made people act upon something. It made people go beyond the perception and do something for their own sake, like kill all the stereotypes and ignore the taboos and all that kind of stuff. So certainly I do believe that, especially in the region, creativity does make huge shifts and play major roles.
Joe, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, why would we be here if we didn't think our ideas could be effective? When we get out of bed every morning, and I know we're not saving lives, but there are ways of changing behaviours, and I think it's really important. And I was going to use the same example actually for that bread making campaign. I don't know the data and the stats, but I absolutely know that there will be more women feeling for lumps and bumps in their breast now in that region than there would have been a year or 2 years ago. And I think that that's a change of behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. Graham, where have you seen like big creative ideas? Loads have come out of Frank over the years. Where have you seen them make a real difference in the world?
Yeah, I think firstly, I think it's probably true to say that the majority of what we do is about making a difference to our clients' world, not the world. That's the first thing, and I'm fine with that. I think we all are. But I think when we have an idea that we have an inspirational client or it's a good cause, then we all enjoy that a little bit more. Although we don't always say that, we enjoy working for brands as we do. And where I've seen it, just from personal experience, I was fortunate enough, one of the causes that I'm very passionate about is the subject of Holocaust education. And we were lucky enough to just work on a campaign around Holocaust Memorial Day, which involved a charity that normally would go out, called March for the Living. They go out and do a march in Auschwitz every year, fronted by Holocaust survivors. Obviously with the pandemic they couldn't do it this year. Holocaust survivors are all getting older, unfortunately, and dying out. They're all in the 90s, they're not going to be about for long. What could they do? There's only so many years they're going to be left on the planet to share their testimony and their stories. And we did something that was film-based, involved some celebrities, was a kind of march of the survivors in their local parks instead of from Auschwitz, they go from the gate to the gas chambers. We replicated that in a small way, got celebrities involved, producing films, and actually the result was miles better for them than they'd seen in terms of Holocaust awareness, because it reached loads more people. And for me, as it was a cause I was passionate to, it sort of made a difference to me, and I think hopefully made a difference to the world. So those don't always there. That's kind of not the main bit of the job, as we all know, running an agency, but it's lovely when you can do that, and it really can make a difference.
They were stunning bits of film as well, Graham, really important. And Paul, from your perspective at Tin Man, where have you seen your work for brands and clients make a difference?
We've done a lot of campaigns for charities and kind of issues-led things, but I think it's also what the big shift really is that yes, kind of drink driving campaigns or that have created great change have always been there, but I think now what you're seeing is consumer brands dipping their toe into that water, and sometimes it works really well and sometimes it kind of doesn't. And the and finally bit of the news is also a powerful slot and actually a good place to be. I think it's become slightly unfashionable to have that, and more fashionable for a brand to have a kind of perspective on a big issue, which is good as long as it's consistent with what the brand actually does in the real world. And I think the risk is that the kind of over sort of purposization of everything risks brand hypocrisy, and sometimes it's better to be kind of conservative as a brand and kind of only say what you can actually back up and do.
Okay, so not taking yourself too seriously.
Well, I just think there's, you know, we don't want. It's great that the brand world has a conscience and is awakening to, you know, lots of kinds of injustice and imbalance in the world. I think there's a danger of overreach that might kind of undo the whole project a little bit. So I think there's, I think it's about balance.
And so there is obviously room for humour and levity, but how do you get the balance right, Jo? I mean, how do you bring, when we've got really, you know, tough times, big themes, we've all talked about really meaningful bits of creative execution. How do you inject humour into brand work when things are heavy?
Yeah, do you know what? I think the really important thing is it's not always right. I think you have to adopt the tone of the debate that you're entering. And some things we're not ready to laugh about, right? So they're just too serious. We're not there yet. But I think there is room for levity and humour, and I think it tends to work better, actually, by observation, on perhaps those issues that have been around for a bit longer. It might be the environment, it might be voting, where we perhaps got a bit tired of some of the shock tactics, and we've used humour as another way in. There are a couple of examples that spring to mind. One is the Burger King campaign, I don't know whether you've seen it, the lemongrass, where they fed their cows lemongrass to reduce the level of methane. I mean, that's essentially about farting. Right? We love talking about farting, right? You can't help but smile about it. So I think that is a great example of where they've done it. Serious issue, added a bit of lightness of touch. And I think the other one is an OK Cupid campaign that happened in the States. It was called Filth. I have to be careful how I say that. The V stands for voters. The rest of it I will let you work out. And it was trying to make voting sexy. And they had a lot of fun with that, but again, a serious issue. So I think it can work. I think there is a role for it, but I think you have to choose your debate. I think some debates we're not ready to go there yet. And I think that's fair enough. I think that's definitely fair enough.
Myrna, what's your take on this from Dubai? Where do you choose? I mean, where do you make humour part of a campaign when the themes are maybe tough?
Yeah, I totally agree with what's been said. Like, for us as a region, we're very funny people, but we also have very dense, harsh topics that you can't be funny about. So as you said earlier, Maya, it's all about the balance, right? You need to find the right balance. You need to pick the topic that you could be funny about and the topic you couldn't be funny about. Like, if we talk, for example, about sexual harassment or women in general, that's not funny. It already sucks for us, so don't do a campaign that's funny. And the classic example that I would take that had a huge backlash, perhaps not in the Middle East, but it was Burger King again. They always create buzz somehow. The tweet where for International Women's Day, where they said women's place in the kitchen, like, that was a smart idea. Like, I get the thought behind it, but it backlashed because it's a sensitive topic. Just you don't be funny about it, right? So it really depends on the balance and what kind of topic are you talking about. Another example from the region is the UN in Egypt. I think in 2015 they created a campaign for Mother's Day where they literally asked people on the street, "What's your mother's name?" In our culture, for some unknown reason, it's embarrassing to say your mom's name. It's actually not a good thing. People were very awkward about it. They're like, "Why are you asking for my mom's name?" To women, obviously, it's not, because we're very proud of ourselves and so on. It was mainly targeted at men, and the campaign made them realize that it's okay to say your mom's name, right? It's your mother. They play a major role in the society. All women in society play a major role in general. So this campaign was funny in a way, but it sent a serious message at the end of the day. So again, it's all about the balance and how you can communicate with your audiences in a way or the other.
Yeah, all about balance. Graham, how do you get that balance right? How do you tread that line between a lightness of touch and a heavy subject?
Well, I mean, you've got to be a bit careful, I think, and what's funny to you might not be funny to someone else, so you have to judge that and test it out a bit. But at the end of the day, humour, levity is a reason that we share stuff with other people. And when I talked about talkability earlier, it's one of the key triggers that you need to press. Or that you can press to get something talked about, and just picking up on a campaign and make it topical and recent. And obviously, it's a nice plug for my agency as well. Is very recently when everyone's feeling a bit rubbish, it's the pandemic, and everyone's a bit sort of fed up with everything. And we sort of came up with this idea for our client Weetabix to try out unusual food combinations, which is fun, quite silly actually as well, just to add to the levity thing. And we, did some unusual food combinations with them, including Weetabix and baked beans, which took off everywhere and got mimicked by literally hundreds of brands who did a big pile on it, kind of made it on TV in the papers. True Talk About It got talked about in the House of Commons, and it was a proper debate involving Jacob Rees-Mogg in the House of Commons about whether or not Weetabix and beans should even be allowed. It was an issue considered even more serious than Brexit. I mean, it was, but that was humour, that was fun, and it can take you anywhere. Obviously, we didn't think it would go that far, because when you start a campaign, that's probably the ultimate ambition, certainly in the UK focus. But it just shows you how important humour and levity was at the right time. And the timing was perfect, and the content itself was pretty inoffensive and quite easy for everyone to get and have a comment on.
And it is about getting to that nub of humanity, isn't it? In an issue. And timing, yes. Yeah, that picture of the Weetabix and beans, Graham, I still haven't forgiven you for that. No. Paul, you're famous at Tim Mann for doing campaigns with heart, so getting to that human truth, which obviously includes humour, often is a cool part of what you guys do.
It often is, yeah. We've had fun sort of taking the piss out of mocktails and bartenders and sort of puncturing the sort of pomposity of that. But I think the thing with creativity generally is about breaking rules, and the thing with brands is really they're meant to stand out. So if everyone in the world is going in one direction and talking about kind of big issues, doing something that kind of goes the other direction is a way of actually fulfilling what a brand's meant to do, which is stand out, become memorable in consumers' minds. So I think it doesn't always have to be purpose, and when it's purpose, it doesn't always have to be funny. Sometimes it can just be kind of mindless, fun, entertaining. I think Graham's example is a great one. And people are looking for escapism. Yeah. People are looking for, the world is very heavy. Issues are everywhere. Everything is laden with issues, and even children are kind of saturated in a world that's kind of full of it. And I think it's part of a responsibility to deliver entertainment and stand out as well as tackling some of the big issues too. Yeah.
Always room for a bit of silliness.
Always.
Excellent. What are the risks, though, if you don't get the tone right, if you don't get the message right, of a brand campaign is just a bad contextual fit, Joe, as you talked about earlier? What are the risks to the brand if they get it wrong?
Yeah, I think they're pretty big, right? At least in the short term. I mean, I think we have relatively short memories, but I think brands, individuals are all a bit more worried now than ever of being cancelled, quite frankly, by perhaps saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. So I think you do need to tread really carefully. But I think at the same time, and this is probably a bit of a mantra at Hope and Glory, but we've always said, a principle isn't a principle until it costs you something. So I think it does separate the brands that really care about a topic and those that are just playing around the edges and trying to reflect what they think their customers want them to say. And so I would say that actually it's more, for those brands that really are, whether it's female empowerment, whether it's gay rights, actually they shouldn't be so worried because they're standing up for the things they believe in, and not everybody's going to like it. Yeah. It's very polarising. But I think it does, those people who are literally just dipping their toe in because they think they ought to, they should rightly be caught out if they're doing that.
Well, whether you're prepared to lose sales or not is probably the test of how committed you are, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Myrna, from your perspective, what are the risks if brands get it wrong?
I think it's super risky. Like, I know that people boycott brands that don't share their same values or support their same thoughts, especially in the region. Like people, and as Joe was saying, it's all. It really depends on the message, right? And it's all about how people react to your message. So I know, for example, due to many political issues, like so many people are boycotting Zara, for example, as a brand. People have short attention span, that's true. They could forget about it, but it is quite risky. If you don't get it right, people will backlash. They might boycott your brand. They might not support it anymore, or I don't know, you could lose supporters or followers or so on. But at the same time, on the contrary, as a creative, I do believe that you need to take the risk if a brand believes in something that is controversial, and yes, it will make a huge buzz and people might not like it, but you believe in it, I think brands should take the risk. And this is something maybe we started doing in the region, like some brands starting to take the risk and talk about taboo issues and so on. But I don't see it quite often. Like, I feel most of the time we're quite safe in our own zone. We don't want to upset people because of the risk. We're getting there. We started to talk about things like, again, the bread making idea, the Mother's Day. There are so many, like the Nike ad for hijabi women that they did that was called What Will They Say About You, for example. It's all about women empowerment and so on. So as brands in the region, we're getting there. I would advise brands to actually take the risk regardless. Yes, it is so risky, but if your brand doesn't stand for something, then what's the point, right? I feel that's where we're at right now.
Graham, what's your attitude to encouraging your clients to take more risks?
I mean, I think it's tempting to say that there's potentially a rebound against the brand, that backfiring can cause reputational damage and all that. But I actually think the risk, in reality of cases, in 99% of cases, if you get the tone or message wrong, or if there's the bad contextual fit, then the creative idea dies. It just never gets any traction. It doesn't take off. People basically can't be bothered with it. They don't share it. They don't even talk about it. It's basically just a shit idea. And no one is particularly bothered. Can we say that? I don't know. Yeah. And no one is particularly bothered by it, apart from the client, perhaps, who is probably not very happy with the agency or the fee for doing it, presumably. So I'm not, that's kind of normally what happens. Yes, the worst case scenario, big backlash, and oh my God, what happens next? But normally it just doesn't register on the Richter scale of creativity, and you never hear about it again.
Well, yeah, that's it itself a risk, isn't it? Who wants to not be talked about?
Yeah.
Paul, what about you guys? How do you approach risk with your clients?
I think we want to encourage them to take risk, with sensible risk. There's the principle in comedy known as benign violation, which is, I think they've tried to understand how comedy works, and it's really interesting. But it's basically you take something that's very safe and you add an unexpected element into it. You don't go too far. You don't, because partly people typically don't like things that are completely revolutionary. They like to have a fresh twist on something to give it excitement. But I think sometimes, as Graham's saying, the risk is overplayed. We're talking about Burger King campaigns that we didn't like and we thought that were a bit iffy. The truth is, it hasn't damaged them. You can think about, Gillette and its kind of disastrous, so-called disastrous campaign that, and it, nothing really happened. It, did its sales really dip, by 1% apparently, and that's in line with what's happening anyway within the razor market. So I think sometimes we can overplay a very hot kind of quick reaction to something on social media as being a sort of a business reality that's going to be affected. And we should always be considerate of, upsetting other people with campaigns. But I think there's a little bit of taking risks, and back to the comedy analogy, a great comedian is often willing to upset a couple of people in the room. That shouldn't be a kind of the objective from the outset, but I think if it comes from a good place, it's okay to kind of ask for forgiveness afterwards rather than kind of, I guess, seek permission at the beginning.
And can you give me an example, Paul, of a brand campaign, either one that you've worked on, that you've seen in the market anywhere, that's got this absolutely spot on? They've pushed at the boundaries, they've taken creative risks, and it has paid off.
I think it's easier to see where it fails, in a way, because I think, you can. They all work. The ones that we think are good. I think the risk is really, you look at a brand like, say, Brewdog that actually does kind of great, kind of punchy, provocative, fun work. In some ways, their risk was overplaying the kind of green card, overplaying we're a kind of wholesome company, and actually there's the backlash. So I think it's about picking, knowing where you can say something and where it's supported, and making sure that's aligned with what the brand and the client can say, rather than a big push to deliver a message that's kind of on trend rather than kind of on brand.
And Graham, give me an example of where you've seen a brand push forward and maybe take a risk and it has paid off?
It has paid off. Actually, I mean, kind of Paul's point about is spot on in terms of BrewDog where it hasn't, I think, and I think just to add to that, there's sometimes a bit of a lag effect. Is that brands can come up with great ideas and great creativity, and then get found out a period of time later. So they can gloss over lots of things, but in the end, it sort of tends to catch up with them sometimes. And that's a good example of it. BrewDog is, a brand that kind of pushed ahead with its equity for punks and all that sort of stuff, and now is allegedly owned by some very shady offshore trusts and then a CEO who's maybe allegedly not done exactly the right things by employees. And that's come back actually to bite them in the bum a little bit more than it would have if they wouldn't have made such a fuss about their corporate ethics and their morals and playing lots of stuff like that. I think, to be honest, where it's worked well, and this is topical and this is UK focused, and I don't really want to pick out one brand, but we've gone through a lot of stuff in this country and in the world indeed with COVID and stuff like that. And I think that a lot of brands, and there's been a multitude of brands that have done stuff for the NHS and supporting key workers and people that are providing the frontline treatment against what's been a pretty terrible period for everyone. And the way that brands have dealt with that, sometimes on the quiet, sometimes not so on the quiet, to me sums up what is the right way to play it. And some of them have been quite creative in terms of the ideas, and some have been just creative in their own way. And I think that's sometimes the case with creative, is what's creative for one brand is actually not that creative for someone else, but it might be creative for them. So, I wouldn't really want to pinpoint anyone, but I think the work that was done that, and it came from the heart for, I think, most of them, probably all of the brands that were involved in it, and that to me really worked for them.
Brilliant. And Myrna, give me an example from the Middle East of where you've seen brands take creative risks and push things forward a bit and it has paid off.
I feel like most brands nowadays, because we have a lot of dense cultural topics, most good campaigns revolve around, like, let's say, women empowerment, sexual harassment, healthy diet, and so on. One campaign in particular that I want to talk about it was done actually quite some time ago in 2009. It was for Al Hariri Foundation in Lebanon. The campaign was called Khidi Kasra. In Arabic language is very interesting, right? It's the most difficult language, but the most interesting, because how you address women and how you address men is like same but different. It all changes with an accent. You literally put an accent on one of the words and it goes into the female mode automatically. So part of this campaign was so simple. The creative was so straight to the point. They had statements that could pass by for masculine, and all they asked the audience to do is khidi kasra, which is take the accent and make it feminine. Like, for example, power. They made the word power, the word encouragement, all of these kind of words, they made it feminine. And I see a lot of brands doing this nowadays. Like, for example, if we take Twitter, for example, they did the female Arabic campaign right now, where you could use your Twitter account that will address you as a female. And what I really like about this approach that brands are taking in general is that they're playing on a very strong cultural insight, right? Like, language is culture. So they're taking the language and sending the right messages to the right audiences. One of the funny campaigns also that was recently done in Saudi Arabia is for Burger King. It was just pure funny. Like, they got the humor spot on. And it was all about how we pronounce different words differently, like Burger King, Burger King, and all these kind of how different ways we pronounce it. And at the end of the day, the campaign was like, it's a whopper. You don't even need to confuse yourself with the words, right? So in my opinion, there are so many great campaigns that were spot on. And again, there were so many campaigns that missed the mark. But the campaigns that, in my opinion, are the best are the ones that tap into a relevant cultural insight that everyone can relate to.
Thank you, Myrna. Sorry to interrupt you there. We do have to wind up because we're broadcasting live all day and we do want to stick to time. We very much popped our hybrid panel cherry today. Thank you very much all for joining us and for your insights into what creativity means now. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.